Good afternoon. The meeting will now come to order. Welcome to the February 17th, 2022 meeting of the City of Raleigh Appearance Commission. My name is Chris Roberts and I am Chair of the Commission. I would like to start by acknowledging that we are conducting this meeting using a remote electronic platform. I would ask for your patience today as we proceed. There may be slight delays as we transition between speakers, participants, and presentations. The Commission is charged to provide guidance, advice, and recommendations regarding the visual quality and aesthetic characteristics of the City of Raleigh. The members of the Commission represent a varied field of expertise and interest in the quality of design in Raleigh. I would also like to welcome our two newest members to the Commission, Ed Lynch and Kyle Springer. Welcome, guys. Now I'd like to ask staff member Keegan Mcdonald to briefly explain for the participants how we will be conducting today's meeting.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Keegan Mcdonald of the Raleigh Planning and Development Department. Today's meeting will proceed very similar to a regular meeting with a few minor adjustments. If at any time a participant has issues with the technology, please send a message to the moderator. JP Mansoff is moderating this meeting. The chat function has been disabled for this meeting for all participants and the Commission members, except for the ability to message the moderator if you have technical difficulties. For each administrative alternate case, a city staff member will provide a brief introduction presentation. The applicant will then be acknowledged to present their case and have 10 minutes to do so. Speakers for the applicant are asked to provide their name and address for the record. Following the presentation, the Commission members will be given an opportunity to ask questions of the applicant and staff. The Commission will then hear from any other participants who'd like to speak on the request. When all comments from the applicant, staff, and other participants are complete, the Commission Chair will bring the item back to the table for deliberation. The Commission members will then deliberate on the item and review the findings listed in the applicable section of the UDO. Following deliberation, the Commission Chair will ask for a motion, which will take the form of recommendation to the Planning Director for action on the request. The motion can be a recommendation for approval, approval with conditions, or denial. The Commission may also vote to defer the case to the next regular meeting, typically in order to receive additional information. The Commission will then vote on the request. I will now turn it over to the Commission Chair to conduct the administrative alternate review.
Thanks, Keegan. We will now call the cases in the order they appear on the agenda. And first up is case AAD 16-21, which was continued from our January 6th, 2022 meeting. So case number one, AAD 1621 at 700 South Salisbury Street. Looks like there are 5 participants: Isabel Maddox, Robert Cox, Ken Thompson, Sean Clemens, and Cheryl Cook. And first we will get the presentation from staff. So Keegan, I believe you're doing that.
Yeah, and so please just bear with me. I did want to pull up for the committee's benefit a few of the old materials that you were provided with at your first meeting, namely just the requirements that are included with building massing for this type of AAD request. I also have a slide that will show the findings when we get to that point of deliberation, so the committee can view those as they discuss. And I also have updated materials which should be in your backup. I think they were titled Revised Graphics version 2, I believe. And so that was really the new information that was provided. Before I get into the slide, just to recap, this particular request originally came forward and included multiple components, those being primarily build to and building massing. The commission asked for additional information concerning the building massing request for the North Tower, or Tower number 1. And so the materials that you'll find in that revised graphics number 2 document speak to specifically that request as it appeared, and I believe the commission voted to recommend approval of the other components. So it's really just this outstanding building massing request for Tower number 1. And bear with me one moment, and I'm going to pull up just what those requirements are. Okay. And so what we're talking about with building massing is essentially a step back requirement. And so between the third and seventh story, for towers between 13 and 20 stories in height, there needs to be a 15-foot step back. And so I'm going to now switch slides just to show and pull up the information in those updated documents. And I believe the applicant will definitely be able to provide some more detail, but I will run through this for the group's benefit. So here's the site. This is looking, I guess, roughly southwest. And the building to the right in this image is the one up for discussion. And so this kind of shows an updated rendering, particularly along that South Street facade, so which is right here. So I'm just going to proceed through the slides, and just to orient everyone, the orange notations on these images represent changes. And so of note, there are really three principal changes that have occurred with this submittal. There's increased variation along the facade itself, on both, it appears, the Salisbury and South Street elevations. They've also increased the loggia from a 2-story expression to a 3-story expression, and also extended it along South Street. So you can see those two arrows showing how that has been changed. And then also increased the setback from the right of way. And so there's a 2-foot setback closer to ground level, and then a 3-foot setback above the second floor. So those are the three principal changes. And this just shows an image from sort of the opposite vantage point. This slide shows what that sort of cross-section view would look like as a pedestrian. And so you can see, just moving sort of outward from the street in, how the arrangement of the sidewalk and the planters, there is some right-of-way dedication, I believe, that's occurring here. And what's shown specifically, in addition to, I believe, some increased plantings, is that setback that's occurring again, first to that sort of masonry section, 2 feet to that masonry section from, um, that sort of that right of way line, and then, from the from that point inward, up on the second level, another additional 3 feet. Um, and so wanted to then proceed to the other renderings. So this is the previous image that you all saw when the case was before you in January, showing that South Street elevation for the North Tower. And then this is the revised image, again, similar to what you just saw, but from more of a street level perspective. And also, this notes the addition of the sort of 5-foot planter, and then that kind of total 16-foot sidewalk width. And this image from the other side of the street, or further down South Street, excuse me. And again, the previous rendering versus now what's proposed. And so you can see sort of that curtain wall, how that is changed. Also the projected sort of taller street trees and the planter bed, how those elements have changed in this rendering as well. And just some additional perspectives kind of showing you 360 how this would look around the building. And so that middle image is from the interior of the site. Left and right images kind of show the South Street facades on either side. And some additional images of what those corners may look like specifically. And I believe that concludes the presentation. So happy to try and answer any questions. But I know the applicant, I think, is prepared to dive into some more detail for you all. So happy to turn it over to them as well.
Very good. Thanks, Keegan. Commission, any questions for Keegan before we jump into the presentation? All right, very good. I'm going to turn it over to Isabel Maddox to begin. And just as a reminder, please state your name and address as any of the participants join in.
Good afternoon. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Good. I'm Isabel Maddox, PO Box 946, Raleigh 27602. I'm here today representing Dominion Realty Partners, the developer of this project. And here with me are the architectural team, Robert Cox, Sean Clemens, Ken Thompson, and Cheryl Koch. As Keegan said, we appeared before you in January, and we had multiple requests there, and you approved most all of our requests except for the way this building, this northernmost building, primarily addresses South Street. Ask us to go back to the drawing board and try to work on that a little bit. And we've done that, and our architects have done really the heavy lifting. And, you know, the biggest thing that we've done is we've pushed the building over 2 feet, you know, to the south. And that's a big push to push that big building over 2 feet. But that allows a little more room adjacent to the sidewalk for a planter. We already have a pretty wide sidewalk there. We've also increased the step back over the second story and changed the way that sort of curtain wall works on the ground floor, giving a little more. I think we've cleaned that up a little bit. So, but I'm going to turn this over to Robert Cox to go through these changes in detail. Robert.
Right. Hi. This is Robert Cox at J. Davis Architects at 510 South Wilmington Street. Yeah. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for all your input from last week or our last meeting. I hope we addressed some of the highlights of that discussion in this latest iteration. If you'll go, Keegan, to the next slide. So we've already sort of gone through the three main things. I think but to recap one more time, the whole building 2 feet to the south, away from the sidewalk, the upper portion of the building, an additional 3 foot step back, and then we've enlarged and highlighted the material change above the second floor, which I think is a move that culminates in the sort of dramatic 3-story loggia at the corner. So it's really about sort of adding a break. I know that last time we were sort of concerned about the curtain wall coming down closer to the sidewalk. So this gives them a little bit more of a material break, and also adds a little bit more human scale to that, sort of showing a floor-to-floor progression. Let me go to the next slide. And this is, again, looking from the opposite direction. And then I think the renderings kind of help really show what's going on. The next slide, please. Well, in the planning section, so we've got a few things moved or sort of called out here, but I think the big picture is that we went from a 19-foot setback from the street to a 21-foot setback. And then in addition to that, the 3 feet above. And then Beyond that, the extra features to that are the 2-6 difference from the masonry to the curtain wall. And as Isabel mentioned, the 5-foot planter. We think that adding that extra 2 feet really gives a good chance to the landscape architect to do a substantial planter on the sidewalk, and so that it really makes that feel like a not just an afterthought, but like a real sort of planted thing, a part of the landscape. As you can see, the total sidewalk is now 16 feet. And and bringing that as the full distance from the sidewalk, edge of sidewalk to the face of the curtain wall as 23.6. So a pretty from curb to glass, fairly significant distance. Next slide. And as Keegan pointed out, this is what we saw last time. I think again, one concern was the glass sort of dropping down and sort of enveloping the masonry, and just sort of being a bit too much glass. So next slide. I think this illustrates kind of what's going on there. Not only bringing that glass up to have that break, but also raising the loggia level one more floor, so that you get this really sort of tall space. The corner of South Street that sort of that addresses Memorial Hall, the sort of monumental sized space that that the two buildings have a sort of communication with each other. In addition to that, you could begin to see some of the planting along the street. Those bigger trees are an attempt to get we grew the trees so that you could see through. But of course, that would be what a more mature tree would look like along the South Street. And then also you could also see how the masonry plays out as the facade gets lifted. Next slide. Again, previous with the glass hanging over, and next. Yeah, and so you can see how that break works, and again, the planters and the sort of extra space on the sidewalk. And then next slide. And this is really just sort of giving the full context, but again, you can sort of see how that loggia really comes into proportion with the building, and really makes the whole thing sort of come together and becomes a really cool urban moment there at the corner. Next slide. And then finally, just since a lot of this is about the sort of pedestrian level, this is just a couple of renderings looking at it from that vantage point. One is looking up, or looking east along South Street to the left, and looking west along South Street on the right. Again, just sort of pointing out the planters, the material break, also the depth of the glass behind the masonry. So just adding texture and rhythm that sort of goes, adds life to this streetscape. And so I believe that's the last slide, but happy to go back to anything and chat about any particular questions.
All right. Well, if that's the end of the presentation, thank you guys for the presentation. Really appreciate you taking to heart a lot of the comments that we had the last time and really laying it out thoroughly for us with really nice information. I especially like that section that you put in here. It's very telling. So, commissioners, do you have any questions for the applicant? No questions? All right, let's see. Keegan, do we have any other participants?
No, we did not receive any notification. Just the applicant's team are the only people who had contacted us, obviously.
Okay, very good. And if there are no questions for the applicant or for staff, then I will bring this back to the table and let's start our deliberations and findings. Who would like to kick us off?
Chris, oh, no, go ahead.
My quick question is, if I was not on to see this the first time in January, is it okay that I vote?
Yes, it is, since you're here today.
Okay.
Sorry, go ahead, Marcus.
Yeah, Chris, I think just building on some of your comments earlier, I certainly think that the architect and developer have taken to heart some of the comments that we made earlier, and I would say, a thank you to them. I don't think it was never our intention to hold up or ask for a significant or meaningful changes or revisions to what they originally proposed, but I think what they've did is brought this back in line with what I think we can point to a lot of the findings that we have to make and your rationale and be able to point to and say a good faith effort was made towards those. So I'm really impressed with what they've come back with.
Thanks, Marcus.
This is Corey, and I'll go ahead and add to that. Just say I also appreciate the extra effort that they've put into taking another look at this. I know it's not an easy thing when you look at multiple stories, but I think the section was very helpful. I appreciate the additional width of the planter, which I think pulls you away from the building a little bit more and makes it appear to kind of set back farther and appears more open because the planter kind of pulls you away from the building, which I appreciate. I also appreciate the way that that upper curtain wall element is now kind of pushed back in the facade. So, I think, arguably, I think I could get behind all these findings, all 5 findings here.
Yeah, I mean, I'll second everything that both of you had said and just state that, there have been a lot of really good modifications to the design that I certainly can get behind. I think the additional 2-foot setback plus that step back together really start to meet the intent for the building massing. I think that planter along the sidewalk is a welcome addition. And like Corey said, really gives you that impression of having that building set back even further. I think the changes to the curtain wall, both kind of picking up the veil and having more of that 3-story loggia meet the corner, really helps to open that up. And then I think the one comment that I would have, since we are the Appearance Commission, and this has nothing to do with my vote, Keegan, would you be able to show the either slide, it was page 8 or page 9 of that presentation? So again, I appreciate all of the changes that you brought to us. The one thing that I point to on this is that, and we're not talking about this because it goes down that private driveway, But on that corner on the right where the curtain wall still comes down and veils over the edge of the base, personally, I think the other side, that front South Street, still has a lot more character to it because that curtain wall has been lifted up and has given a very clear definition between the base, kind of that setback or the step back, and then the curtain wall above it. So I'd encourage you to just talk about that with your design team. If you think that that curtain wall should still come down and overlap the base, personally, I think it would look better if it was picked up a little bit, but that's just my opinion.
Well, I'll agree with that 100%. And I think that goes with some of our finding, which is it has a true base, middle, and top. And I think when you do pull that up, like on the south side, like what they've done side, it does clearly delineate the base and the middle. The top, you could argue, but I think they've met the intent. But I would totally agree on that side that, you know, if they could take another look at that, just personally, that's just my personal preference as well, that if they pulled that up, it'd be better looking build.
Any other comments from the commission?
I think in addition to kind of the bottom, middle, top, I think the changes that have been made really do activate the street and kind of create more of a relationship between what's going on those first couple floors of the building and what's going on the street. So I think those are really nice changes. Thank you.
I'll just, add as well, I appreciate them coming back with multiple ways of addressing the intent that we were hoping for there. And I think I'm there as far as supporting it, definitely. Only question I might have for Martha and Adam, if you were here, would be with regard to the larger landscaping area. Is there any booking there as far as further scratching there in terms of you creating that more meaningful effect? And the only thing I would worry about slightly with a much larger planting area is that kind of creates a kind of vegetated area between the building and the sidewalk that kind of has the effect of making it feel less urban in some ways.
Yeah, I agree. It's not a deal breaker for me though. I think and maybe it's just a question of making those breaks between the landscape beds a little wider. But yeah, I think it works though.
I think it could work really well at the level of detail we have. I just don't want it to become like a back of house type feeling to the building with having it be completely vegetated down that side of the street. But I agree. I think holistically we're to the intent.
Yeah, I would agree with that too. Seeing that plan on the left side, I mean, if there was a little more pavement, concrete pavement, sidewalk leading up to those doors to give it a little more of an entry mat type feel, and even lessening those planters, I would agree with that too. And then obviously being on the north side of the building, these planters aren't going to be getting a lot of daylight, so just making sure you choose plantings that are going to thrive in that sort of environment. Any other comments? All right, Keegan, could you bring up the findings again? All right, so we'll go through those. We talked about how this meets the intent of the building massing regulations. Need to look at how this conforms with the comprehensive plan and adopted city plans. Keegan, do you have those up?
I believe I have them in the report. I'm happy to pull them up.
I think in the packet, there's a LU 5.1 reinforcing the urban pattern and LU 7.6 pedestrian friendly development. I think those are both strong, as well as compact development LU 2.2.
Thanks, Corey. I would add to that LU 7.4, the scale and design of new commercial uses. And I think all of UD 7.3 is also applicable. So that is plenty. All right, thanks, Keegan. Sorry for making you jump back and forth.
Not a problem.
Let's see, if the approved alternate use is a change in building material to mimic a change in the wall plane, most substantial and durable building materials are located at the bottom floors of the building. I totally agree that that happens. If the approved alternate proposes a building setback behind the sidewalk, in lieu of a required step back, the resulting open space includes public amenities such as seating area, trees, landscaping, or outdoor dining. We've already talked through that. And then the building contains architectural treatments for the base, middle, and top of the building. I would agree with that as well. Any other discussion on that? Would anybody like to make a motion?
I think maybe before we make the motion, maybe understanding Corey, is there a condition that we'd want to have with that? It was sort of the eyebrow over top on that west side, or is it just a request for consideration?
I think it'd be a request. It's not on our street-facing side, so we can't really say a whole lot about it. But I would request that they did take another look at it. I think that's enough, as long as that's part of the public record.
Yep, that's fair. Well, I'll go ahead and make a motion to approve the application as presented.
I will
Do I have a second?
that. This is Corey.
Second by Corey. I believe we can just do a vote by show of hands, or if you could turn on your cameras, or if you don't have that ability, if you could just say aye, state your name and say aye. So all in favor? All right. Any opposed? All right, that passes unanimously. Thank you again to the applicant for coming. Really appreciate those design changes. I think it's very well developed. Thank you.
Chair,
All
I'm gonna
right.
excuse myself if that's okay.
Absolutely. Thank you, Corey.
Thank you.
All right, that was our only case on the agenda today. So we are going to switch over to the non-business side of things. So I know Catherine Hill unfortunately could not join us tonight, so we do not have a commission, the attorney report. So we'll get that the next time. And then Keegan, I believe you're prepared to give an overview of the pending text changes.
Yes. Give me one moment.
Okay.
Well, maybe Chris, while he pulls that up, has there been any talk of us going back in person as you know, some of the talk about?
Not that I've been aware of. If Keegan's got an update, that'd be great.
Yeah, I could provide an update. And sorry, I'm looking at my email and I think maybe Bernard Thaxton is having issues still getting in. Apologies, I didn't see that sooner. JP, I don't know if you've been contacted by him, but I can provide you with his email address.
Yeah, that'd be great. I could reach out to him.
Apologies for not seeing that sooner. It looks like he got the invite, but for whatever reason, it was not allowing him to join. Yeah, so I guess first on that question of in person, so the council talked about it on Tuesday at their meeting, and they have basically given the Appearance Commission and all of the boards and committees and commissions the option to return in person as soon as they would like. I will say we've discussed with staff, and we feel it's best that the March at the very least, the quasi judicial meeting in March, so the first meeting, be virtual. And the reason we're requesting that is because noticing has already been provided to residents in accordance with our city code requirements and state law requirements. And if you do switch formats, you have to renotice the case to state that change, even if, on the record it was stated it would be going to the next available meeting. Our attorneys have advised us that any change in format requires a renoticing. And so to avoid that step, we would ask that first meeting in March be um, virtual. And I know there's some other discussions we're going to be having with the chair regarding a potential retreat. And so I think there would be an option there, assuming we're able to locate and find space for the second meeting in March to potentially be in person. I was actually planning on I think we had a discussion set up to talk about that a little bit. And of course, happy to talk about it in this forum too, whatever the chair's pleasure. But we're certainly open to that. There are potentially some constraints about finding adequate space in the time that we need to do it in person. But just want to throw those options out there. And then the other point I'll make is they did say by April 1, all committees, commissions, and boards are required to come back in person to conduct their business. And so we've asked, I think there have been some questions asked about the potential for hybrid meetings. At this time, that's not an option that's being, it's going to be available. So again, that really, it's kind of a firm deadline or switch date to back to in-person would be that first meeting in April.
Yeah, very good. I mean, I certainly agree with keeping that March 3rd meeting virtual for all the reasons that you laid out. But my preference would be to have our March 17th meeting, which we are trying to have as our retreat, in person. I think it would be great to have everybody in person. And since it's a retreat, if anybody didn't feel comfortable being in person, we might be able to do that one virtual, but I'm going to have to rely on you, Keegan, and Catherine to decide that.
Yeah, I will say for smaller group settings, we actually have a device that makes hybrid meetings pretty workable for groups of approximately this size. So technology wise, if there's a desire to do the retreat hybrid, and of course that there's no legal issues in doing so, I think we'd have the option in technology. I will put it in my notes though to reach out to Catherine and check to see. And also we have that discussion set up on Friday. So
yeah. Does anybody else have any preferences?
I would say let's do virtual as long as we can, from purely an attendance perspective of the last time we went back to in person, I think we had a meeting there where we were struggling to get to quorum. Now, granted, we've moved to full and alternate, and that's helped a bit, but that's going to rear its head again a bit. But as far as the retreat goes, I'd love to do that in person, and if hybrid needs to be an option for folks, that makes sense. But I definitely think it's more meaningful if everyone's there in person, and it's a way that we get to know each other as well. So.
Thanks, Will. Any other thoughts? I would say if anybody has any thoughts that they might not want to share here, please feel free to email me or call me after the meeting at any time. Happy to talk about it. And then Keegan, we can talk about that more tomorrow.
sounds good. Yeah, and I guess just in relation to space issues, I think there's obviously lots of options. The city has lots of rec centers and community centers and other facilities. I don't think it'll be an issue. It's just something we'll have to sort of sort out what seems to work best for folks. Okay, well, if there's no more questions on that, I'm happy to get into this presentation. It's very brief and high level, but I think the intention here is just to make the commission aware of changes that are coming down the pike related to our UDO. So I think in some of my introductions, I've told the group that um, one of my primary functions with the city is I help manage our text change program, which are, again, changes and amendments to the UDO. And so for those who may have been following along over the past 2 years, this council has been very active in the text change realm. There's been lots of changes and updates to the code, and many that are still in process or pending. And so I just wanted to highlight a few that are more imminent, and then also some others that just might be of general interest, and one that I think this group may have interest in actually hearing a presentation on and potentially providing comment and feedback, because it does impact a little bit more the design realm, and so I'll get into that. So again, just intended to be high level. I will say if the group is curious or wants more information on any of these, I'm happy to distribute information or even come back with a more in-depth presentation if you're interested. There's also, of course, tons of information available online through board docs. You can basically just search these case numbers and find the latest case materials, and so you can dig through the staff reports and presentations there if you're curious. So the first one is Transit Street cross section. So as you all probably aware, the city's undergoing a pretty massive planning effort with Wake County to plan for bus rapid transit in the near and long term. And part of those changes, there's a lot of moving pieces, of course, but we've had to make some changes to our UDO in order to accommodate these this BRT service because of its specialized nature and also the additional right of way that will be needed for these particular this particular service, transit service. And so this particular text change would add 3 busway street cross sections to our code. So the code basically contains an assortment of different street cross sections depending on what your street is designated as in the street plan, which is adopted as part of the comprehensive plan. And so these 3 busway street cross sections would be for 2, 4, or 6 general purpose travel lanes, and then each with their own dedicated bus lanes. And so the real application of these cross sections is just on those BRT corridors. That's all they're really designed and intended for. So the ones that are the furthest along in terms of planning are the eastern route along New Bern Avenue, also the western route along Western, and then probably the southern route as well. And then the northern route is still undergoing. There's still some discussion about that alignment, but it's probably towards the back in terms of how far along they are in finalizing that specific alignment. And then another component of this street cross section text change will be the addition of a frontage. So for those who may not be aware, frontages are part of our zoning code designation. So they are another layer in terms of a specific zoning designation, and they're meant to either make allowances or restrictions to the property and how it relates to the right of way specifically. So frontages may dictate how far the building needs to be from the street, whether their parking is permitted between the building and the street, access requirements, etc. And so one thing they've heard through the planning process for TOD, particularly along certain stretches of New Bern, is that there's a lot of mature trees, both in the median, as some of you probably are aware, and also along the edges of those corridors. And there's a lot of interest and concern on part of the neighborhood about what this project will mean for that tree canopy. And so this frontage is designed to address that issue where it arises. So again, it's kind of bubbled up from this station area and planning process related to New Bern, but it could potentially have application elsewhere. It would be a frontage in the code that people could choose to apply anywhere, but it just kind of came about from those discussions. And so the intention there to require a little bit of a deeper setback and then require new canopy tree planting or retention to try to preserve as much as we can some of the trees that do exist, or ensure that a new canopy can be put in its place. I will say there's a lot going. There's a lot of pieces and um, conditions at play here with these corridors, but we do hope this is at least addressing some of that concern. So the other text change that is moving right along and actually is scheduled for a public hearing in mid-March is TC11. So this would remove minimum off-street parking requirements citywide for all uses. Now, that doesn't mean that you couldn't provide parking, but it does mean that the city would not hold you to a specific minimum. We have a lot of exemptions in the code today for our downtown areas, TOD, other projects that might be proximate to high frequency transit. But this would basically, like some other jurisdictions have done, just eliminate that minimum requirement. And so the intention here is to address projects where the existing exemption, they fall outside the existing exemptions, but it's not necessary for them to meet the stated minimum. And as this group is probably aware, a lot of those minimum parking requirements are pretty arbitrary and based off of not so great data. And so we recognize that it's kind of a dynamic landscape, and there's other factors that will influence the amount of parking provided, like lending, and the market that might be addressed by the specific development, et cetera. The other component of this is requiring long-term bicycle parking for multi-unit living. So that's kind of both covered and protected bicycle parking. Establishing maximum off-street parking requirements for most uses. So related to the minimum, imposing a maximum parking requirement. And the intention here is we've seen a lot of projects, particularly in downtown, that have provided a large amount of parking. And there's multiple sort of issues identified with that large amount of parking. Oftentimes there's a carryover cost onto various tenants. In multi-unit cases, people who choose not to drive are often stuck with higher rents to kind of subsidize the amount of parking that's provided on site. Also, just that large amount of parking does encourage more driving, and it seems to be concentrated in areas where we're trying to encourage people to take alternative modes. And so these maximums are going to be set pretty high. They're not meant to capture everything. They're meant to capture those sort of edge cases. And if you choose to go over, there are mitigations that would be imposed. And so that would depend based on whether or not you're downtown or an urban frontage or other areas. And so roughly speaking, those are requirements that it be structured, that it provide a certain percentage of spaces that are EV ready, also potentially stormwater and landscaping requirements. And there may be some others, which I can provide those details if you're curious, but there are basically allowances for mitigations. And then there's also an option for an alternate that would be reviewed by our transportation director if you're able to show that this is absolutely needed. And so that could be an option too. So there's relief that's built in. The next item, go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt on that last one. They've also upped, I think, a lot of the requirements for long-term and short-term bike parking for various uses. So in addition to the requirement for the multi-unit one.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
I saw a significant tick up for like commercial office buildings in certain districts. And what's what'd you say the next step is for this one?
It has a public hearing scheduled on March 15th.
March 15th. Okay.
I think it's a second, whatever the city council's second meeting in March is, which I think is the 15th.
I think that's right.
Keegan, has there been any distinguishing between underground and above ground parking? Seems like the above ground is a lot more disruptive, to the urban form.
There's actually another separate but related text change dealing with parking deck screening, which I know doesn't necessarily resolve the issue of providing too much, but I think there's basically, I guess my point in bringing that up is there's an effort to address sort of the visual impact of large parking decks or podium parking. I think a lot of the issues that have been identified with projects being overparked or being required to carry parking when, for instance, a developer doesn't think it's necessary or it's not needed to secure financing don't necessarily have to deal with the visual impacts. And so we didn't really make a distinction in this text change. It's really just about um, reducing the total amount. And then some of those mitigation measures are also to kind of address hopefully what we see as sort of the secondary impacts of incentivizing in some way and subsidizing people to drive and for there to be excess parking. The next text change is accessory commercial units. And so this was originally proposed as a by right accessory use, which could be internal or attached to a residential structure. So many of you are probably familiar with the live work concept, which we have in the code today, but that limits employees and customers and allowable uses. This would basically be a expanded live work option. So it would permit what may appear as sort of an appendage or addition to a residential structure, be it a detached house or apartment, that could contain a commercial use and something beyond the scope of what you would have in live work. So live work is pretty wide open today. Actually, you have to go through a special use permit process, but we've had people get live work permits for everything from dog training to dance classes to taxidermy. Really spans the gamut. So, but this would be more explicit and geared towards other types of amenities, particularly like retail sales and eating establishments. I will say this has undergone pretty major revisions with the Planning Commission, and so the version they have recommended out really basically um, reverted back to a live work use that still requires, or what today is understood as live work, which would still require a special use permit. It would be called accessory commercial unit and would have some additional allowances, but also some additional requirements. And so, as you all might be aware, the Planning Commission is the formal body that provides recommendations to the council, and they can choose to accept or deny that recommendation, or mission is able to kind of provide that. And so the version the council will receive the recommendation from the Planning Commission, which does differ pretty significantly from what staff had originally proposed and what I think the council had originally seen, because there was a touch point with them before it went to Planning Commission. The only reason I bring that up is just if you have any interest in this, it could change significantly from what the Planning Commission has recommended out versus what the City Council may choose to act on. So just wanted to flag that. And the next item is TC 2021. We have called this Missing Middle 2.0, and it follows on the heels of the original Missing Middle text change, which was adopted and went into effect last summer, which most significantly permitted duplexes by right, so attached houses, two units on a single lot by right throughout most residential zoning districts except R1, which is basically our least dense district. And also permitted townhouses in R6 where they historically were permitted, and changed how we measure density. Instead of units per acre, it's lot or site area per unit. And also made some other organizational changes and revised our compact and conservation standards, which deal with sort of developments that preserve a significant amount of open space. And so that was a pretty significant change, kind of full scale reboot of our residential districts. And this takes that a step further. It introduces or modifies standards for small homes on small lots, which we call tiny house, but probably not what you're thinking. Bigger than tiny, but we're keeping that standard just sort of as a legacy term so people don't get too confused. But essentially it would allow homes of up to 1,200 square feet in gross floor area on smaller lots. And the intention there is to allow to kind of synchronize what we're permitting today as accessory dwelling units, but allow them to sit on their own lot. And relatedly, introducing a flag lot concept for residential development. So we hope that will assist people who are otherwise interested in building ADUs, but might not be able to for financing purposes, or new development who want to be able to build in that option and give someone their own lot. Also synchronizes lot width standards for residential building types. So basically making equal the lot width requirements for whether or not it's a detached house or attached house or an apartment. We just see that there's really no reason for them to be super different. And we're trying to encourage smaller apartment buildings in particular. And that's the other major component, is that it would introduce a development option when development is within proximity to high frequency transit. And so that this allowance will be paired with a map in the comprehensive plan, which has not yet been adopted, but would basically identify areas that are within a half mile of BRT or a quarter mile of other planned high frequency transit, as roughly what's shown on the Wake County Transit Plan. And so you'd basically be allowed increased density, additional building types when you're near those high frequency transit areas. And also the Planning Commission is considering an affordability requirement if you want to build a larger scale apartment complex, or even potentially, basically larger scale residential structure or complex, whether that be in a residential district or a mixed use district. So this particular item is actually at Planning Commission right now with the text change committee. So it just was heard for the first time on Tuesday. My assumption is it will be there for a few meetings. So if you're interested, you can certainly follow along, see what changes are made through that process. And then last, this is the item I had flagged before that I think maybe this committee will have some interest in. If not, no worries. But essentially, this is looking at screening for parking decks. And so today, really, we only require screening for parking decks in the DX or with an urban frontage. And the requirements themselves are a little vague. We for instance, require like active uses around the ground floor. We require ramps to be obscured. Also for sort of material continuity from the base to the top. But the council has moved in a direction with some developments in the downtown area specifically, and in some other urban nodes to require more stringent screening and lighting for parking decks. And so this text change would create more of a standard set of screening and lighting requirements for parking decks, and also potentially increase those further for our urban areas. It's still in the drafting phase, so I don't have too much to share, but there are some recent rezonings that include some of the language that's likely to make it into this text change. The other piece that might be of interest to the commission is today already you can receive a design alternate to our screening and landscaping and screening standards. And we are thinking of revising that alternate language potentially to include some provisions maybe specific to parking decks. And so one of the things we've heard is interest in allowing potentially art of some form to kind of count towards screening. There's a lot of hurdles to putting art on a parking deck, namely the cost is the biggest one. But where that might be of interest, it could be a decent option for a design alternate, just given the subjective nature of art. But we're thinking of maybe revising these standards. So it could be something that you see, particularly with projects who want to propose something that doesn't meet the letter of our code. Although we are trying to build in a lot of flexibility for different types of screening functions and structures. So once we have something more firm, our staff will communicate with the chair and see if it's something that potentially there's interest in us bringing forth for some comment or advisement on. So
I think that's a great idea, Keegan. I think, we see these from time to time, so it'd be great to see the text coming down the road. Is there any form of draft that we can see yet?
there's no draft that's ready
Okay.
for public consumption, but what I can do is share, and I'm happy to send it to you, Chair, is a copy of what have become sort of standard conditions associated with parking decks in our urban areas, because I think a lot of that language will probably it will look similar. I can't say it'll be exactly like that, but it'll look similar. So that might be just something to give you an idea of what this is working towards.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's definitely a particular interest to this group. That's great. A lot going on. Can only imagine how much effort goes into those text changes. Well, that's great. Anybody have any other questions for Keegan? All right. I think the only other piece of business that we have for tonight is approval of our minutes from January 20th, 2022 meeting. So if everybody's had a chance to read those, unless there are any comments, if anybody wants to make a motion to approve those.
I'll make a motion to approve. This is Martha.
Martha. I'll second it. It's Chris. By show of hands, if you're able to raise your hand on screen, all in favor? Douglas, you weren't at that meeting, so you don't even need to vote. So it looks like we've got a unanimous approval.
Hey, Chris, for the benefit of the new folks, should we do a round of quick intro and maybe give them a chance to introduce themselves?
Yeah, that's a great idea, Will. Thanks for that. You want to go first?
Sure. Will Gaskins, the lead with Downtown Raleigh Alliance on our economic development and planning team, and I'll kick it to whoever's next.
All right, you get the kick. You get to pick who you want to kick it to.
Martha's next on my screen.
Great. Martha Eberly. I'm a landscape architect with Andrew Pogon Associates over here in Boylan Heights. Welcome, new folks. Glad to have you. And I will kick it to Megan.
Hi, I've been kicked. I am Megan Beach with Hope Brothers Construction, and I've probably lived in Raleigh longer than most people. I've been here since '89. I'm back.
Who are you going to kick it to?
I am kicking it to Kyle.
I'm Kyle. I'm new. I work with Duda Payne Architects in Durham. I've been in Raleigh for this being my 4th year. I'm excited to be part of the committee. And I'll kick it over to Patrice.
Hi, everyone. My name is Patrice Gilmore Haley. I have been in Raleigh since, 1999. I'm a National Supplier Diversity Manager for DPR Construction.
Awesome. Who are you kicking it to?
I will kick it to Ed Lynch.
Hey guys, I'm happy to be here. I've been a resident of Raleigh for 17 years. I have a background in municipal and transportation planning. Site to group. And I'll kick it to Justin, I guess.
Justin, you want to introduce yourself? Maybe not. He's staff, so he may or may not be paying attention. I'll go. So I'm Chris Roberts. I'm an architect with LS3P Associates here in Raleigh, and I've been here since 2006, but been trying to get here since 1999. It just took me 7 years more than I had hoped. So I love it. I live over in the Mordecai area, and hopefully he is here listening. Douglas Johnston. Douglas, can you hear us? You want to introduce yourself?
Oh, yes. I'm Doug Johnston. I've lived here, sorry, Megan, since 1987, but I've been retired a couple of years during that period. So I think you can still claim credit for the longest active professional on the committee. Thanks for letting me join or
that's
involving
awesome.
me.
That's great. Douglas was, his first meeting was our last meeting, the meeting previous to this one, which I think went on for a record, what was it, 6 hours? 8 hours? I can't remember. It was a long one. So, yeah, we didn't get the chance to introduce Douglas the last time, so appreciate that. Hey, Keegan and JP, do you guys want to introduce yourselves for everybody?
Yeah, sure. Keegan McDonald, I guess you've heard me talk a lot. I am originally native of Maryland. I grew up outside Washington, D.C. I'd spent time in California and Texas before coming here. Started with the city December 2018. Been working with the city for a little over 3 years. Involved with work with the Board of Adjustment, also of course the Appearance Commission, and then with our text change program.
Awesome. JP, you still on?
Yep, I'm here. Hi, everybody. JP Mansolf. I'm in the Comprehensive Planning Division of the Planning and Development Department. We all across our divisions in the department, we like to help each other out with moderating meetings and helping out any way we can during these sort of virtual meetings. So kind of volunteered to help Keegan today, and maybe I'll be moderating a future Appearance Commission meeting.
Awesome.
Hey, Keegan,
appreciate it.
Any update on the question of kind of staff for Appearance Commission ongoing? I know you had kind of stepped in an interim role.
Yeah, thanks for asking. Unfortunately, I don't have an update for you all, but I think the latest I've been told is that you can probably expect to have to deal with me for at least another few months. And then sometime potentially in the summer, there may be that transition. But we should know pretty well in advance. So I'll be sure to communicate with the chair and with this group about any potential staffing changes.
Awesome. That's great. Great idea, Will. Appreciate you saying something, and hopefully we'll have a lot more time to chat and get to know each other at our upcoming retreat. So more to come on that probably after tomorrow. So unless anybody has anything else, I think we are adjourned for the night. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.
Thanks.
Good night, all.
Oh, yeah, we're good. Sorry. We're good. Thanks, guys. Have a good night.